Thanks everybody for coming today. I understand it's probably a while since many of you have got together in an event like this, so it's great to host you here all today, and I hope you enjoy the food and so on, but more importantly I hope you get good benefit out of what we're going to discuss today. And of course we've got a couple of customers who I'll introduce you shortly. So my name is Peter O'Connor. I'm the Vice President of Sales for Snowflake for Asia Pacific, based here in Sydney. I joined the company back in late 2017, was their first employee here, and I'll get into some of the figures in terms of how our team has grown over the last 3.5 years since I've been here. But before I do that, I really want to just give you a little bit of an update as to, I'm sure everyone here has heard of Snowflake before. I'm not sure to exactly what level, so I thought I'd give you a very brief introduction, and then I'm going to introduce Clive Asprey, who runs our SE team, or systems engineering team, for the Australian North business, who's also going to talk about some of the announcements that we're making tomorrow at our global Snowflake Summit event. Just a reminder that the information that's in the pack is embargoed until 11 o'clock our time tonight. So if you could please refrain from publishing anything until that point, that would be much appreciated. Otherwise I'll get in a heap of trouble. Okay. So Snowflake itself, so I'm not going to bore you with the dates of when the company was founded and so on. Needless to say, we're a 9-year-old organisation. We've been out in Australia now since we began in late 2017. And Snowflake is what we now call the data cloud platform as a service. So it's a fully automated SaaS service, if you like, and it's built on Snowflake's multi-clustered shared data architecture. It's a brand new architecture, and again, we're not going to dive into the weeds of the architecture, but today's more focused on the announcements that we're going to make tomorrow. But there are 6 solution kind of pillars, if you like, underneath the Snowflake Data Cloud platform, and they're made up of data engineering, which is really around preparation, transform and ingestion of data into Snowflake. It's around the data lake. This is another one, which is around putting all of your data into a single location, making it more accessible to a wider bunch of business users, and that's all of your data, so your structured data, your semi-structured data, and now also your unstructured data. So breaking down the silos that large organisations and organisations of all sizes have with their data and putting it all into a central, accessible place by a wider bunch of business users. And then there's, of course, the data warehouse, which is where Snowflake really began, and that's where you run all your analytical workloads. And then our data science, which is where you run your ML and AI queries against at scale, great performance and so on. Then we have data applications. We have a lot of growing numbers of customers, and maybe Florian can talk a little bit about this in terms of what Quantium are doing in this space. But building applications on Snowflake that are highly secure, again, for all types of significant data set sizes and so on. And then finally, data sharing, which is a really important piece of our growing business, where customers are now have the ability to share data instantly and securely into company or across subsidiaries of their organisation, but also across their ecosystem of partners, customers, and so on, in real time and highly secure. But then also we have a growing number of content or data producers who are putting data into the Snowflake marketplace that is then instantly accessible by Snowflake customers to blend that data with their own data to drive hopefully deeper and greater and more meaningful insights. And for example, we have all the Australian census data up on the Australian marketplace, where customers can instantly access that data and blend it with their data if they choose to, again for hopefully a wider, deeper insight into combined data sets. So, of course, in Australia here we're available on Azure and also on AWS, and we have been on both platforms now for over a couple of years. At some point in the near future we hope to be on GCP in this country as well, although those dates aren't locked in yet, but I don't think it'll be in the too distant future.
So just on that, is that just you can only be in so many places at once? Is it a scale thing? What's the...
Yeah, I mean, quickly I'll answer that. So we have to sit in a platform kind of release roadmap, and we've only recently released GCP in both London and Amsterdam, and so Australia will hopefully be next. But in between that, we only have so many engineering resources that can roll out platform deployments on these three platforms, and we're also going into new countries and markets all the time as well, in the Middle East and other parts of Asia and Latin America and so on. So without being too specific. And so that's the reason. So we've only got so much bandwidth, and it does cost a fair bit of money each time we do deploy, irrespective of what platform that is on. Some of the Snowflake today globally, I think it was only a week ago, we ran more than 1 billion queries in a single day across our global network of platforms, which is truly impressive, because it was only really about 15, 16 months ago where we passed the 500 million mark. We now have approximately 5,000 customers using Snowflake globally, and about just over 250 customers here in Australia and New Zealand. So, and that is again accelerating at a good clip as well. We have today, as of today, we have 79 employees in Australia and New Zealand, and we have offices in Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Perth, just recently opened in Canberra, and then also in Auckland. Now, we will also be looking by the end of the year to have probably around about 105 employees, so it's growing at a good clip. And we've just recently moved into our new offices here in Sydney, down at Barangaroo in Tower 1, which is great. The other thing I'll add, we have around 40 active partners in Australia and New Zealand today, and they range from the large GSIs, which are the obvious ones like Deloitte and Accenture and others, and then also down to the local systems integrator community, whether they be nationally focused or even city focused in Perth and Auckland and places like that. So what other stats did I have for you? So we've now recently opened an Australian support centre in Melbourne, so that'll be based out of there, and that'll very quickly grow to around 20 support engineers based in Melbourne there. And then I guess the other thing that's just happened this morning, we were IRAP protected, assessed and approved in April, which we announced back then, but then this morning we also finally got our IRAP protected assessment approval for the Azure platform as well. So now we're IRAP protected on both, which is fabulous, given that we've just opened our Canberra office only the last couple of weeks. Clive and I will be there next week for a large federal government event. I guess if you've got any questions, we'll leave them to the end, because there's a lot we want to get through today. So I'll introduce Clive Asprey first, who's going to run through the announcements that we're making. It'll be tomorrow our time, but later on this evening in the US time. And then I'm going to ask Pooyang Askari, sitting right here. So Pooyang works as the Chief Data Officer at Domain, and they have been a customer of ours. I think Pooyang and I were just discussing this. They were our third customer here in Australia back in, I think it was around April 2018. And so therefore has been a user for just over 3 years, and great to see you here again, Pooyang. And then also we've got Florian Pasqua over there. Florian is the head of engineering at Quantium, just across the street really.
Used to, not anymore.
Sorry?
Not used to, not anymore.
Oh, not anymore? What's your current title?
Certainly. No, the title is correct, but the company moved.
Oh, you've moved locations,
Yes.
that's right.
That's
You're down at Redfern now.
Exactly.
That's right. Sorry mate, I didn't know that.
I want you to get your fact straight, mate.
Need some data.
And so Quantium has been a customer now for about 2.5 years as well, and Florian is going to talk a little later on through lunchtime as well. So please, as the food comes out, please get stuck in. I'll hand over to Clive now, and Clive, you get through the announcements of this evening or tomorrow.
And I joined Snowflake shortly after Pete at the start of 2018. So if you're using the packs, I'm going to go through what's in the packs here. So I'm going to start with the data cloud growth. So the data cloud, right, we talk about this a lot, and it's a global data mesh where all organizations on Snowflake come together and use that to get near unlimited scale and performance with their data. It's made up of two things. One is the technology, which is Snowflake, and the other is the data, and that's the content that populates the data cloud, whether it's from applications or databases, other SaaS platforms and so on. the graphs you see in the pack here are the actual, it's a true representation of the data cloud, and you can see the growth that's happened in the last 12 months. Each dot on this graph represents a company, an organization, and the line between each dot represents a consistent and well-established data share between these organizations. If you look in the center right, there's a large cluster, and that is actually one of our data providers called Starschema that actually published a COVID-19 data set. So that big cluster you see is all these organizations that are consuming that data in real time to then enrich and enhance their own internal reporting and analytics. Okay? So every Snowflake customer has access to the data cloud as soon as they become a customer. The pillars around innovation are made up of the categories you see here around connected industries and so on. So we're going to dive into each one. We're going to start with the connected industries. So every Snowflake customer can access data seamlessly and in a highly secure manner from any other Snowflake customer, and you can then collaborate together to find new insights. The data marketplace, if you think about it, it's like an online shopping experience for data. So customers have been able to acquire data via the marketplace for quite some time, but there are now over 500 data providers, data listings on the marketplace. And the use case for this is customers bringing in this data to enrich their own first-party data. And that could be used to find further insights. It could be used for things like machine learning, so you can find more attributes to build better models, to make better predictions and so on. We also have something called data exchange, and this is kind of like a private data marketplace where you as an organization can bring in some of your partners, your other organizations, and have a kind of private walled garden where you can all exchange data seamlessly and securely. And so we're seeing a lot of interesting things like data clean rooms. So we've heard about the third-party deprecation of cookies that's coming in next year. And so we're seeing a lot of interest in customers leveraging data exchange and some of the features in Snowflake to do secure sharing of data without exposing PII data. You'll still be able to join these data sets together and find new insights. We're also adding, as you'll see here, like a try before you buy experience. So if you're in the marketplace and you want to try this data set, you'll be able to bring that into your own Snowflake account, and maybe it will be a subset of data. And if you like it and you think it's a good fit for you, you'll be able to seamlessly upgrade that to a full data set. And the key thing here, of course, is that we're adding a monetization layer. So as a data provider, you'll be able to actually monetize your data that you put on the Snowflake marketplace. And data consumers will be able to come along, discover data sets, and then consume them, and all the monetization will actually happen through the Snowflake platform. Finally, there's going to be a seamless ServiceNow integration as well. We introduced a Salesforce.com integration not too long ago. So the idea is going to be very similar, where your ServiceNow data will be immediately available in Snowflake with basically very, very zero effort and no integration is required. Okay. So moving on to governance. So security has always been a key part of the Snowflake architecture, and we build security into the platform. And this is especially true when you go into things like data sharing. So we've developed sophisticated tools for data governance. So we introduced something called dynamic data masking fairly recently. And so if you think about it, if I log into Snowflake, depending on my privileges, and whether that's through a Snowflake UI or whether it's through BI tools, you can apply policies at the data level to say this particular role in Snowflake is or is not allowed to see data in the clear. So you can actually apply masking policies that get applied in real time as the data is queried. There's also a broader ecosystem beyond Snowflake, we realize that. And so we've got an expanded partnership with one of the leaders in data governance, which is Elation. And so you'll be able to actually manage your Snowflake governance policies and workflows directly within Elation. And there'll be further integrations with other tools in the future as well. Another thing we're introducing is, there's lots to go through, that's my notes, is a classification service. So this, if you switch it on, Snowflake will actually look at your data and find potentially PII data that you might want to apply data governance policies to. It will then annotate it using a new tagging framework that we've introduced. And then that will allow you to then apply things like dynamic data masking. So imagine going through your entire huge data set, finding all email addresses, tagging it as an email, and then being instantly able to apply a masking policy to that. So if I'm a database administrator, I have elevated privileges. It doesn't necessarily mean I should be able to see people's PII data, and so this will automatically allow people with those kinds of privileges to still do their job, but do not see PII data.
So just a clarifying question, the capabilities are coming soon, private preview, and in development, which all could be the same thing potentially. Is there a hierarchy to that, or time frame to what's the difference between coming soon and in development?
So development is kind of pre-private preview. So this is literally being worked on right now, which we expect to be rolled out in the not too distant future. The way Snowflake rolls features out is to go into a private preview, right? And that's normally because certain customers have asked for a specific feature. And so we'll build the feature out and roll that out to a very small set of customers initially. We'll then generally expand that private preview to get more feedback. Once we have enough and we're happy with the project, we'll then go into what we call a public preview. At that point, any Snowflake customer can use the feature, and they can test it, and so on. We can get more feedback, and then eventually that moves into generally available.
So it still doesn't really clarify the difference between coming soon, private preview, and in development. Yeah. Just from a sort of hierarchy.
We're talking just months.
Yeah, is it months versus is coming soon next year, 6 months, is in development 6 months?
Yeah, well, it can vary depending on the feature, right? So it's,
can I just ask a question on the data exchange?
yeah.
Am I right in thinking that's a bit like a DMZ for various companies to come into?
Yeah.
So how deep are you going on facilitating that? Because if I look at somebody like Data Republic, who does a similar thing, they work really hard to make sure that you and I, when we are engaging with that DMZ, the legals are there, the whole process, there's a whole lot of work that goes around us making that DMZ. So are you guys doing that as well, or is it just, here's our platform, knock yourself out?
Here's our platform. Yeah, it's the latter really. However, you, as a data publisher, you can quote your T's and C's in terms of your data usage, so on and how the data is allowed to be used.
So would you help with, if you and I are running different T&Cs and we're coming at it from different approaches, is there any facilitation of that between us, or is it just up to us to work out on our own?
At the moment, it's between organisations.
Okay.
Yeah. So we provide a platform to make that really simple in terms of physically sharing the data, but there's still agreements between us.
Okay. Thank you.
Into platform optimization. So obviously continue to innovate and update Snowflake with efficiencies, making the engine faster and so on. So in the old days, you used to have to wait for the next dot release to get new features. Snowflake rolls out new features every week with zero downtime. So as these new features become available, Snowflake customers can take advantage of them immediately. We recently rolled out a change to our compression algorithm, which means on average, customers should get approximately 30% less storage required for the same amount of data. And so that will work for any newly added data or any data that gets updated in Snowflake. That will, so over time, the data will take advantage of this new compression algorithm. And again, this is all completely transparent. Customers don't have to do anything to enable this. It just happens as part of the platform. And with the only impact really is that they'll pay less for storage over time. Got a new query acceleration service, and so we've been using this internally actually. And so what happens here? Snowflake has always had this capability to scale out concurrency. Scaling up for complex queries is harder, but this new service will actually allow that. It will break a Snowflake query up, and where possible, it will accelerate certain portions of that query. And so in some cases, it doesn't work for all queries, but for some cases, it can be up to 15 times performance improvement. There's also, going into private preview, is a use case around what we call high concurrency, low latency. So Snowflake's traditionally been used for these kind of very big data, crunching large amounts of data, returning it to BI tools and data science. But there are customers that need much faster queries on small amounts of data. And so this high concurrency, low latency workload is something we've been working on as well. And so what we're rolling out in private preview is the ability to go typically on average a 6 times increase in queries per second for a particular server, as well as an 8 times decrease of their average query duration. So that's more queries, less time, and more for customers with these specific kind of small query, high concurrency use cases. Oh yeah?
What's the percentage of customers wanting that service versus customers wanting that traditional, what you're talking about, these data sets in query? I'm trying to figure out how prevalent it is.
It's, I guess, becoming more prevalent, especially in the data application use case. I think it's the kind of thing that everyone needs, probably. So I'd say it's definitely a smaller percentage, but it's growing quite rapidly.
Yeah, and is there a size of customer that likes that? I mean, obviously, most of the civilian enterprise, but...
Not really. I mean, the great thing with Snowflake, it's a pay-for-what-you-use model, right? So you can start very, very small. So there's no real minimum size or maximum.
But in terms of the appetite of people who are picking it up, like, do you have an idea of the size of those organisations?
It can vary greatly. It tends to be more, I think, digital native customers. So they could be, small startups, or it could be, much more established companies.
Thanks.
Moving on to data programmability. So we're always trying to make Snowflake more flexible to work with. And we recently introduced what we call serverless tasks into private preview. And so with serverless tasks, this is the ability for Snowflake to actually look at your data transformation jobs that you've built in Snowflake. Instead of you having to decide how much compute to throw at that, it will do it for you. Which means, again, it takes effort away from development and gives you, again, really great performance without actually having to do anything. We've introduced what we call automatic schema detection for Parquet, Avro, and ORC data formats, which allows you to ingest data much more simply and easily. We've also introduced a SQL-based scripting languages. So customers that are used to platforms like Oracle, Teradata, and so on in the past will be used to what we call store procedures, and they're written in SQL. And so we're introducing SQL-based scripting language for store procedures as well. Okay. And that will be in Snowflake SQL. We've always had the ability to support semi-structured data such as JSON and XML. And this is one of the reasons Snowflake became so popular with companies for using it as a data lake, because you can store that data natively and query it immediately. But we're also introducing the ability to store purely unstructured data, so audio, video, documents, and that kind of thing as well. Okay. And there's a new SQL REST API. So until now, with Snowflake, you use a client driver, so JDBC, ODBC, and so on, Python, Spark, these kinds of things. So the SQL REST API will allow customers to use a web service to query Snowflake, and so this could be really useful again for building applications on top of Snowflake. And we're rolling out a couple of features called Snowpark and Java user-defined functions. So Snowpark expands the usage of Snowflake to other developers that may not come from a SQL background. So Snowflake until now has really been a pure SQL-based platform. Snowpark expands this into other languages such as Scala. So if you come from a Spark background, for example, you're used to programming in these kinds of languages. And so it lets you use your favorite IDE to build and develop applications, but then point that at Snowflake for actual execution. And then take advantage of Snowflake's instant scalability and scale performance characteristics. Related to that is Java functions. So Snowpark is a client-based language, and Java functions are the ability to bring in third-party libraries for running things like machine learning directly on Snowflake without the need to take data out. And it could be things like scoring or anomaly detection, those kinds of use cases. So you might build a machine learning model in one of our partner tools, for example, a data robot, a data ebook, and then be able to deploy that directly in Snowflake right next to the data for performance reasons. Okay. And then finally, we're introducing a partner program to actually assist partners in building out interesting applications in this space, whether it's machine learning, security, and so on. So giving them resources to allow them to actually to bring solutions to market built on Snowflake in this case.
So are all these innovations agnostic on either Azure or AWS?
Yeah.
So it's day one on both platforms.
So we try and provide the same service on every platform. We do private preview can be the limited private preview can be rolled out on a single platform initially.
Do you have partners that are currently testing that out now at the moment?
Talking about locally, US for sure. Yeah. We can get details on that for you.
Some of the GSI, big GSI partners would be locally, but some of the local integrators, not yet. But some of the local integration partners that we have are, deemed, some of the most advanced partners that we have in the Snowflake partner ecosystem. So they won't be far away.
And apart from giving them access to the resources to be able to build these out, is there any sort of monetary incentive that you're giving to encourage partners to come onto your platform?
No, not really. I mean, there are facets of the partner program where they get paid margins and finder's fees and things like that, but most of our partners are dedicated data practices where they make their money on consulting and migration and all the other kind of professional services, bits and pieces that go around those things.
So what I'm thinking is if you're building an application on it, right, if you look at what Zoom's doing, where they're giving out hundreds of thousands of dollars for organizations to integrate Zoom into their applications, any of those?
Yeah, we have
that at the moment, or?
We have a program which I won't go into depth here on, but for startup organisations. So some of the startup organisations that some of them not so much longer a startup like Canva, for example, is a very large Snowflake customer here. They started several years ago on Snowflake when they were much smaller. But we now have a seeding program through the venture capital community here in Australia into a lot of really innovative, smaller startup technology companies, of which there are quite a few, and there are some financial incentives for those guys to get them, like free credits and so on, to get started.
Which VCs are you working with?
That's a good question, mate. I do know, but I put them on the spot. I'll come back on that. But the two prevalent ones, the ones where Canva came from, I'll look them up. I'll tell you in a minute. Keep going.
The unstructured data images, I wasn't sure when you said it, so just a clarification, is that available now or is it coming?
That is private preview. Let me just double check out. Yeah, private preview.
Private preview, right. So not free private preview.
So that would mean that one customer is using it currently?
Oh no, there could be quite a few, right? So it's, if a lot of customers have asked for it, there will be, it depends on the feature, but there could be a
So
number
they're
of customers.
catering it for you effectively?
But effectively, yeah. Yeah.
So what's your critical mass then when you go GA? Like if it's come back to Phil's point.
It really, honestly, it really depends. It's things like, I'm trying to think, like geospatial support, right? That took quite a while to get a lot of feedback from many different customers, and so that was quite a while. Others can be, a few months, right? It varies greatly depending on the features, to be honest. It's really hard to give a very definite figure. Sorry.
I assume this is the challenge of not having, like Salesforce have quarterly release, right? So
Yeah, exactly.
Everything's on sync, right, versus the weekly release of when it fails.
That's right. And sometimes what happens is they might have a broader vision of like geospatial, and they'll run incremental changes to that over time. So you get more and more features available every week, essentially.
From a partnering point of view, just interested in the recruitment of partners, where that's coming from. Are you stealing them from Teradata partners or something, hypothetically? I'm just interested in the dynamics around the partner recruitment, not so much at the GSI level, because they're going everywhere, but just for the smaller ones here.
Well, some of our key partners here are Servian, Altus. As I said, there are ones that are more remote, like Mechanical Rock in Perth, for example. There's a bunch, but and then there are some specific ones in New Zealand as well. But yeah, Altus and Servian. Obviously the other ones I thought we had.
Aware, RXP.
Yeah, that's right. RXP, Aware. There's quite a long list, but most of our lead generation is actually done by our local integration customers, partners. Some of the larger enterprise opportunities are more aligned with the GSI community, and some of these partners have multiple interests, right? They're not just dedicated to Snowflake, they're practicing.
None of the ones you mentioned.
Yeah.
Close to it.
And other things.
But my ignorance, Peter, do you actually have a header channel
Yeah.
here?
Yeah.
Yep, okay. So how big is that team?
3 in Australia.
Oh, that's just Oz or is it ANZ?
It's across ANZ. Yeah. One's on maternity leave at the moment. I'm due back in a month.
You mentioned Snowpark last in your presentation,
Yeah.
but it's first in your press release.
Saving the best of us.
Yeah, okay, yeah, because I mean, it seems to me that opening this up to more developers and more languages is absolutely huge.
It is, yeah, it is a huge thing for sure. It's again, it's giving that flexibility, I guess, to developers, right? To developing the code that they want. Like Star, for example, it's better at certain things with SQL. It's maybe easier to debug, and maybe people are just used to coding in that manner and using their favorite IDE. And so
Developers make platforms. So,
and then later, we've got Python coming as well, right? So that's good.
Python's
Something this front.
Some of they were square peg and blackbird.
Oh,
Oh, yeah, cool.
That's 40.
Which also, I know that recent announcement, of course, was the BlackRock. Probably many of you have heard that. I don't know if you saw the announcement, but BlackRock, which is an investment asset management platform, very famous, particularly around superannuation investment firms and so on. We've also now ordered to Snowflake as well.
So maybe we'll finish on that. so customers have traditionally used Snowflake for BI and analytics, but I think like building applications on Snowflake is becoming more prevalent. And so the Powered by Snowflake program is exactly that. So so the founding members are BlackRock in the financial services, Adobe in the advertising world, and the final one was Lacework in security, which is really interesting as well. So Lacework, they do security analytics essentially, but they have a really interesting product which actually leverages Snowflake data sharing, so they can actually do analytics on these terabytes a day that they are actually moving from your account. You can ingest your security logs into Snowflake, share it with Lacework, they can run their analytics and they can share any anomalies back in, which is super interesting. So there's some really interesting innovations in terms of product that are actually being built on Snowflake like this as well, leveraging features like data sharing, which is pretty cool.
And Lacework just getting started here in Australia. I'm not sure they have any customers yet, but they're growing very, very quickly in the United States. At Quantium, they're a substantial Snowflake user, and I'd love Florian to share his experience with Snowflake and with you all. As mentioned earlier, they've been a customer for just 2.5 years already. So Florian, if you wouldn't mind, and
sure.
please feel free to ask any questions as we go along, or we can save them.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't have necessarily a specific agenda for that session, so if you have any questions, I would be more than happy to take some of those. So first and foremost, I'm not sure that people really know what Quantium is in the data and analytics landscape, but in a nutshell, Quantium is one of the world leader in data analytics and AI, so we are an Australian-based company, owned mostly by Woolworth. So I think you've read our announcements about that big acquisition that Woolworth has made in the capital. So now Woolworth owns 75% of the company's capital. But we are not exclusively a retail shop. We have as well a big footprint in banking, and we've recently announced a massive partnership in the form of a joint venture with CBA. So we're in the Australian overall markets. Quantium has a strong relationship with our biggest retailer and the biggest bank. So Quantium delivers, Quantium, I qualify it as an hybrid company. We are kind of halfway between delivering consulting services and products. And actually the interesting part is actually both colonize each other. There's a real capillarity between the analytics use case that we are treating through consulting engagements, and the product that we are delivering. So a lot of what we're delivering as part of our product suite have been created and have been really stemmed from the consulting experience that we have. So that's a bit about the positioning of the organization. So we're 1,000 people roughly working in building capabilities for our clients, either through consulting or product, using data. So that's core of our DNA, is actually making sure that organizations are leveraging their data better to make more informed and more robust decisions. In that context, I think if I take the genesis back over our experience in Snowflake, 5 years ago, we were exclusively an on-prem shop using a Hadoop platform, 280 nodes. We were one of the biggest privately owned data center in Australia. And we were already building products on top of our Hadoop stack in Spark. But realistically, when we were looking at the technology landscape and how things were evolving, Hadoop and Spark wasn't really for us, like we could identify that wouldn't be for long the only use case and the only need to process data and create analytics at scale. And obviously, being a data analytics shop, we wanted to get ahead of the curve and basically make sure that our data stack was the most fit of purpose possible. So for that reason, we started looking at what could give us an edge, what would be the next generation platform for delivering our data crunching and analytics. So we've done an extensive POC for 3 months with various vendors, and we landed on Snowflake as our stack of choice. The idea, and I think that's what is important really, is when choosing a stack, you always have to consider your use case holistically. It's not only, you don't bring a stack like Snowflake to necessarily only to enable one type of analytics query. It has to be more holistic than that. And what we wanted is really to find a data partner, platform partner, that would be future-proof for a specific product use case, but broader as well. How we could serve our analytics in a more powerful manner. And really, Snowflake has been so far that partner for us. I think for the main three reasons. The first one is performance. At the time where we've done our POC, and I think since now, we've not necessarily been undertaking any really side-by-side performance metrics and performance comparison with other vendors. But we are convinced that Snowflake provides us with the best performance cost point. It's important, right? Because it's not only performance. Performance is always to be related and put in perspective with the cost that you're putting in the engine. In the cloud, you can almost get the performance that you want. It's only a matter of how much money you want to find. So that optimization point, what is the platform that delivers for your use cases the best performance for the money, was pivotal. And we were convinced that Snowflake was that platform. The second point for me as a head of tech at Quantium was really finding something which was actually very robust and resilient. We were obviously doing processing, I think, for our retail stack, something like 30 billion transactions over 2 years. So reasonably big data sets. We're doing, I think, obviously nothing in comparison to the billion of queries a day, but I think we're doing something like 100,000 queries a day at Quantium, which is quite significant. And we wanted something that basically would be working all the time, like something which is as robust and resilient as possible. I think when I talked to her a few years, like or maybe 18 months ago, or at a conference for Snowflake, I think I said that at the time we said like out of 10 million queries, only 1 failed. And I think that's as an engineer who's basically building capability on top of a stack, that is extremely important because there's a whole range of engineering and defensive coding that I don't have to cater for. I just treat Snowflake as a black box, as a SQL black box that just does work. So that was extremely important, that part of our resilience. And overall, for me, the last point was we would be back to SQL, which means that my engineers and the analysts working and interacting within the platform would work using the same tools and using the same language. We've always thought at Quantium that SQL was a very powerful paradigm for manipulating data. That Hadoop was somehow like a bit of an anomaly through this history of tech, and actually we were back to SQL, and I think that's where the tech was heading. So for the three like very important pillars, we decided to go with Snowflake for building our first set of products. That's where we started for building essentially a live dashboarding on retail transaction for our clients. And based on that success, progressively Snowflake colonized our stack. So it started with products, and now we have 80 analysts doing data crunching and their day-to-day consulting activities on top of Snowflake. So that's interesting for me because like you would say, well, now like part of my product stack is very coupled with Snowflake. And actually that's a fair point. That's true that we have an important footprint in Snowflake, but because this is SQL, because we're not necessarily building any specific IP in Snowflake as per se, we're building SQL, and SQL is transferable. The SQL that I'm writing today for enabling my metrics in retail or in banking, I know that with a reasonable small migration effort would run in BigQuery or in Athena or in whatever warehouse that will come. So I think that's something which are obviously when you're making tech decisions is important. So where you want, how much you want to adhere to a platform. I think Snowflake actually have nailed that because whatever they come up with is relatively standard. So we're obviously very excited to explore Snowpark and Scala and Java integrations. Because for us, it's actually what we want to do is when we build code in the platform, we want to make sure that we can take the code out of the platform and send it somewhere else. And I think that's what is going to be pivotal for us, looking at how Snowflake evolved and how they position their stack going forward, is we want to stick with the vendor as long as we are sure that this is the best stack in market. And at the moment, we have absolutely all confidence that this is the case. I think among the many features that I think Clive has announced today, there's a lot of things that are extremely relevant for people building applications. So he mentioned low latency queries. So that's actually something which is pivotal for us. Because we're building a lot, obviously, live query, but there's a lot of stuff that we consider are pre-aggregated. Some of our data patterns are basically only weekly. And there are a few things that's where we want actually to do pre-aggregation. And having a store, what we call a feature store, for having like billions of records pre-aggregated, and we can have an API that hits the data and return that to our clients within a few milliseconds, is actually an important pattern for us. As I mentioned, like the Spark abstraction layer, so Spark being the framework that's been used historically on Hadoop, bringing that in Snowflake would as well allow us to explore different patterns. We have still a fair bit of Spark at Quantium to do values pipeline and analytics. Being able to see how that's going to work and transport that execution into Snowflake to benefit from the scale of Snowflake and our operation mechanism that we have already established in Snowflake would be something that I'm keen to see. Lastly, and probably the most strategic points, is I'm convinced that having our clients sharing data with us, because this is what Quantium does. We have our application stack, we have our product stack and consulting stack, and we ask our clients, we like using the SaaS model, that this gives us a data feed so that we can enrich their data and do analytics. We think that's a good pattern for the moment, but we think the way the market is trending with GDPR and all the various privacy constraints that there is, I think this is going to go harder and harder. We secured recently one of the largest retailer in Europe, and their security assessment that we have to do to have data share with them, to have a data feed from them, is extremely comprehensive, is extremely complex, takes a long time. And we think that this trend is not going to go away. This is going to go harder and harder. And the next step for us is, from a marketplace perspective, how we could make sure that instead of how we could basically create a market, an insight marketplace with Snowflake. so that our IP goes to the client. We don't ask the client for the data, we install our IP directly to the client. And that's without, as per se, a data feed or an ETL being created between the client and us. So that's really the next step of development where I think there's definitely there are some opportunities there, both technically and commercially. So that's probably like a very unstructured and unprepared summary of our journey in Snowflake. This is a very, very rich landscape, so I'm happy to take questions if you have any.
We might just leave the questions to the end if that's all
Happy
right.
long. He gives me the look.
No, that's fine. Yeah, thanks very much, Florian. As always, mate, you've been a great client. It's tremendous to have you here today. Young, if you wouldn't mind just sharing, I know you've also been a customer for 3 years. It'd be great if you could just share your experience as well. Mate.
Sure,
It's a little
absolutely.
bit different.
If everyone can hear me if I speak when I'm seated, so that I continue as this position. I think just going through our experience with Snowflake and what we found quite exciting there, a lot of stuff that Florian mentioned was completely spot on for our business. But we had initially a different challenge to tackle with, which is quite common in a type of businesses that domain sits with them. So, for example, Quantum example is Quantum is a more of a heavily toward technology kind of centered business, versus domain is a media slash basically commercial slash like it's like a very complex group of functions work together to build a domain group, and it's just very common to see example of a domain when you look around in any market. So the challenge we had was, before I go through that, I just quickly share a very brief story of where domain was and what led to us to consider a solution like Snowflake and what sort of unlock we discovered through Snowflake. It's a huge unlock. I was quite outspoken about this, so maybe you've heard about this in I don't know, any other interviews or conversation I had about this topic. But so 2014, 15, late 14, 15, I basically came in touch with some of the leaders at Domain at the time. At the time, Domain Group was like a very fast-growing business, roughly 300 staff at the time, a subsidiary of Fairfax Media, the unicorn within the business, tripling or doubling its revenue and size literally year after year. And the very common side effect of a business like that, with like that pace of growth, is the product and services is few steps ahead of data capabilities. Data capabilities is always lagging behind. And then I just came across a business that wanted my potentially involved in a consultation to begin with, that very advanced in certain services that were providing in a national scale, but was unable to do the very basic data capabilities. Not many people had access to any data. Very basic question across data could not be answered unless days, if not weeks, of effort by an individual. Data was scattered around as just a bunch of Excel worksheets, basically. That was the data capability, and whatever else was available was coming from parent company. So there was a plan for a business like this that usually goes through the states of data maturity, basically principles, to make the data first of all available worldwide, and then make sure that people start using it for data-driven decision making. So that's stage 1 and stage 2 data maturity, classic definitions. So that process took a couple of years for Domain, and we were quite successful in that. We brought a few new technology to the business, like things like Tableau and other visualization platforms, some data warehousing in the mix. And we went from like 5 people have access to like a blob of data to like 40, 50, 60% of the business getting access to real-time self-service data and analytics without any dependency. It's hugely transformational. Like it's just like you would walk in the floor of domain and you could see people are on these graphs and visualization. It was a moment of pride for everyone. Like domain became like a poster child of wow, how a business can quickly transform. That was the point that we started hitting the classic hurdle that any business with that journey usually face. And that is suddenly demand for analytics completely outrun the capability of delivery. So I usually use the analogy of a restaurant that you become so successful that people come and queue outside, come and sit on the table, and you're unable to serve them even you are having a great food on time, and it creates a huge dissatisfaction and actually fires back. And you lose momentum, you lose customers, people say, oh, you know what, instead of just walking around for 3 days to find who is going to help me with data because these people are busy, I'm better to just go with my gut feel, yeah, $10 million growth, that's fine. And they go with that. So basically we are becoming victim of a success in this situation. So what's the solution? Very large organization traditionally was making that central data and analytics teams bigger and bigger. Hiring and like a team of 10 suddenly become a team of 20, 30, but the response time is not linear. You double up the size of a team, you get 20% increase in performance. You triple up the size of a team, you're actually potentially going to lose the performance because it has to go through so many hops and things like that. So the solution theoretically was out there for since 2005-06 period when the entire new generation of idea about how a modern data organization should work, and that was called the solution was decentralized BI analytics. So decentralized BI analytics, in theory, in textbook, says you don't make your central BI function bigger than a certain size because it just, as I said, it's going to backfire. So the best practice is that you start developing decentralized capability within marketing environment, sales environment, etc. So each of those functions have an immediate access to the data expertise within their scope. And if something becomes very complicated, then they can come and reach out to the central BI, and that's going to be very high performance and so on. The reason that no one could pull this off correctly, literally no one, and it was become a kind of failure, was there's always a problem when you have a huge set of data, when you have massive data sets, and you want to open it up to more than a central BI team or data analytics team or data science team. You hit a problem of trade-off between if I open everything is available to give the maximum flexibility, I can't basically cope with concurrency and the load on the central data, the data governance and all those problems. If I aggregate data and I share just aggregate data out of the central team, the problem would be the output is very average because people can't ask all the questions. So this is the place that Snowflake came. Snowflake was literally the very first time we saw an answer to this problem. The answer to the problem was you can actually provide access to 10 billion row data set to 50 people across organization outside the data team, central data team, and all of them hit them concurrently, ask any question they want without anyone else even notice even a small lag in the access. So basically the technology the breakthrough that Snowflake provided actually was the last checkbox we needed to roll out a successful decentralized BI analytics. Today at Domain, we have a central team of 30 data scientists and data engineers, etc. But more than triple this number having access to the entire set of data, excluding PII maybe, and they can basically ask the same question. They can just query 3 years worth of Google Analytics data, which is probably sits around for domains, it's around 500 billion rows, without us even knowing about it. It's just completely, I don't know, pipe dream 5 years, 10 years ago for us. It's just like unbelievable. Even inside the team would not be possible. So this was literally the moment that we managed to actually continue serving the demand without going to making and building a massive central team. The response times are absolutely super fast right now. Anyone needs any question, matter of minutes to get to the answer of it. Very advanced one, maybe a day, and so on. So this is the story around the main value deliver for Snowflake to us. But when we roll out the Snowflake domain, then suddenly we realize that, wow, there are many other use cases. For example, we can actually, we are processing certain data sets through traditional, let's say geometry. I was talking about that with Peter just earlier on. Like we are processing the entire Australia geometry information quite routinely. It's gigabytes on top of gigabytes of polygons that if you want to reprocess the entire update of a country, it may take months, if not weeks, months. If not months, weeks to just to get a refreshed set of data. That means from the moment a change happened in a border of a suburb until the domain wants to provide it to its customers, could take weeks. Now, Snowflake, literally same set of code that was using on the similar like SQL or other platforms, takes weeks to days, if not one day. It's just unbelievable, and you don't need to hire new people. You just need to just simply migrate through. No more costly servers that's supposed to run for weeks on a very expensive. So these are the perk of having the system in place. So the story today about like having fast response queries, having PII masking, etc. These are amazing from point of view from domain because it just, the trend in the market is you want to clean up your tech stack. This is the trend. This is the trend in 2020 era that we are in. You don't want to have like 53 different technology and pieces on top of each other to achieve what you want. So if you can do the PII management, if you can do the fast queries as well as the data warehousing queries, if you can do the unstructured analysis, etc., literally under one roof, that means we can clean up our tech stack and get to the point that we can have easier team build process, easier knowledge sharing process internally, and so on. So this is an amazing roadmap ahead of us that when I heard today, I was quite excited about some of this stuff. Anyway, so I'm more than happy to answer any questions, as well as Florian, if you have a question for us.
Yeah, thanks, Bjorn. Yeah, you guys, geez, Len, you're going to a dinner party tonight,
Would you like this as well? Birthday party, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock.
Yeah, please, if you've got any questions for either Florian or Puyong, if you want to shoot.
Very good.
You mentioned Michael, heaps and heaps of screens, all with charts and doing analytics. Who was the user? Who was? Were they unexpected users in the organisation? Was it the sales folks trying to find new agents to
I
go
hope
to?
so.
Yeah, just the different types of users, and then how they respond to the different.
I can give you the example.
Yeah.
So domain has a domain business dealing with close to 35 to 40,000 real estate agents in Australia. Roughly 10 to 12,000 real estate agencies in Australia.
Sorry, how many was that again?
Close to 40,000 real estate agents and 10 to 12,000 real estate agencies. I put ranges because some of them may not be in the business a certain period of time. So those real estate agents use domain for a platform for advertisement, right? But in the same time, their business goes on the back of finding their next vendor, their next property. So domain account reps, those who goes to sell our products to these real estate agents, traditionally we're just going and putting a brochure in front of the real estate and said, hey, if you pay this much, you're gonna be on the front page. If you pay this much, you're gonna be the second page. If you don't pay, we are not even let you to advertise. So that role changed through this process. Our sales account reps, a third of our business, would go and sit in front of the real estate agents. They would open the laptops in their office, use our visualization technology, for example, Tableau, connected to mega million raw data sets served by Snowflake to Tableau. And it would say, all right, do you want to know what is the ROI of you in this particular suburb if you spend this much to being on the top of this particular suburb? Okay, let me just do that. Drag, drop in front of the agents, answering specifically the question related to that particular agent who was basically active, let's say, in suburb of Croydon or Parramatta or somewhere in Melbourne. So these are the new example of users, those who were prepping for a pitch to a real estate agent, for example, by playing with the data to discover the insights that would share with these agents. That was one example. Marketing as well, and other examples.
So the salespeople directly using the technology, which doesn't always happen.
Yeah, which is impossible actually to offer them because the technology to offer them access to those mega data sets, millions of users interaction wasn't there.
Yeah, excellent.
Just curious to excuse me, to either of you. Do you find, Florian or that you're using your own analytics capabilities in-house for business improvement, process improvement? In other words, are you sort of turning your capabilities inwards and looking at where you could optimize, or I don't know, just do you find that you're using it in anything like that from an analytics perspective, or is it all external facing or client facing?
For Quantium, it's definitely external facing. Yeah. No, we're doing reasonably little on internal enablement through analytics. I mean, we have our finance team is not yet on Snowflake, for example. Yeah. It's probably a question of scale because we're still like a small business, or we're just like we're a mid-sized business, or the volume of data that Quantium generates as an organization, not necessarily a need of putting that in a Snowflake instance, for example. When you reach like probably like the size of CBA, like our 50,000 employees, like the amount of internally the organization generates, yes, that's probably where you're going to start having benefits of doing that, like for internal enablement.
Woolworths might have some demand too.
But we work on BigQuery.
One of the documents had, I think it was a 612% ROI over 3 years. How does that line up with what you guys are saying?
Yeah, so I won't put a quantification, I will put a qualification. I think for me, the benefits are huge because it's really engaging for both sides of the spectrum. It's very engaging for engineers building on top of Snowflake because they have a very fast and performant and resilient platform to build on, and very fast for the users. So it's very hard to say actually, what is our ROI? What I'd say is actually it just opened the door to building stuff that we would have never built. So it's impossible to quantify because we're doing things that we would have never done before. Like before Snowflake, all our reporting was asynchronous. A user would schedule a report, setting the parameters that would run for a few minutes and come back with the result. Now most of our use cases are live. Within seconds, certain type of queries would come with an answer. All of that from a user experience perspective opened up the door to new revenue streams, new use cases. So that's why I refuse to put a quantification because that would mean like we are doing the same thing and we can measure before and after. That's not what we're doing. We're just doing different things now, which we think are more in tune with where the market is.
Look, for domain is apart from exactly things that we couldn't do, as I mentioned earlier. A simple example of return on investment would be the saving in hiring headcounts that otherwise we should have hired. We are now serving a company close to 1,000 people working at it, staff. Around 650 of them actively daily using the analytics platform, from product, tech, marketing, sales, etc. in absence of this capability, we should have a ratio of 1:6, 1:7 to serve them in a reasonable rate. That means we should have something around 100 people in our BI team. Our core BI team is under 10. Core BI team. So it's just obvious. Like if you just simply say to add the TPVs, standard rates, etc. It's just like the numbers are just insane. Also, the other bit about return on investment is just the direct thing. So we were using a different data warehousing solution before. We actually transferred the exact budget we had in the first year to Snowflake to do 4 to 5 times more, just without space. So the very first year example for us was because of budgeting perspective, we didn't have any room to play with first year. So we just shut that down, switched this on, everything transferred. If you exclude that overhead of transfer of technology, we just did 4 times, 5 times more. So that's a direct math.
I've got to ask that who was the previous incumbent?
And what was it that pushed
As
you
much as I'd love him to say it, we won't say it.
We've got one ambition down here that Hadoop wasn't working.
Yep.
What were your specific issues with Hadoop? Why didn't you see it as the future?
So I think there were 2 major problems I think that are Hadoop is first the initial investment that you have to do in terms of CapEx in building that platform. Then the fact that this ecosystem has never been mature enough so that it was totally holistically packaged. You always have to basically build up your Hadoop stack using a composition of various stack that basically adds up in complexity. So for executing a simple at-scale query on top of a data set, you might have been weaving up to 5 or 10 different stacks that you need to maintain. You need to have a team to do that. And then the first problem is like the amount of investment that you have to just execute at scale a query was absolutely massive. And then a question of performance. So Spark is very good for doing certain type of queries and analytics. It's still a very relevant part of our stack. But for a lot of vanilla window function or thing that actually SQL was very performant of doing, in average for the same price point, we think that Snowflake is 5 to 10 times faster than the equivalent of Spark. For obviously, it's not all use cases don't translate the same way, but for the typical distinct count that we are doing, for the same investment, we have a factor of 5 to 10 times more performance. However, again, Spark is evolving a lot. Now we execute Spark natively on top of Kubernetes without necessarily requiring a Hadoop stack. So it's simpler, but still Snowflake, when it's applicable, will always be at the moment our go-to from an architecture standpoint because it's faster and simpler.
Yeah, we have a customer in Melbourne, again, one of our pretty early adopters of Snowflake in the utility space, so an energy company, and they were a Hadoop customer, and their data science queries were taking about 8 hours, and they put them straight across into Snowflake, no tuning or tweaking or anything like that, and took less than 60 seconds. So,
It's the open stack of analytics now.
yeah.
To be honest as well, like, on this note, Spark can be extremely fast, but it depends how much effort you put in your Spark optimization. Because it's a very open framework. So an amazing engineer would have potentially been able to put that like 8 hours into 1 hour. But he would have maybe spent 2 weeks of doing that. And there are not that many engineers around that will be able to optimize those workloads.
If you find them, how
If you
expensive
find
are they?
them.
And how expensive are they?
Exactly. So the points are made by Peter is without customization. You don't optimize Snowflake. You don't touch the engine. For us, that we absolutely consider it as a black box. You get the performance that you get. If it's not good enough, then you need to find out other patterns to accelerate it in your stack. But you don't have your engineers like tweaking the platform, which I think is great.
So, very easy to set up is what you're saying. You mentioned earlier about your implementation partners. If it's so easy to set up, what have they got to do?
Well, they've still got to migrate data. and so on. We have an ecosystem of alliance partners as well, like Tableau, Domain is a big Tableau user. We have a number of other BI tools, data science tools like Data-Roku and Data Robot. We have a lot of ingestion tools like, Informatica and Talent and Matillion and others. A lot of our partners have their selected, technologies that they like to build their services capability around. All those components need to come together. And there are some out-of-the-box connectors, with Snowflake and these partners that make things reasonably simple, but still you've got to migrate data and so on and tune a few things. It's not a completely automated service. It does a lot of really smart things like no partitioning and no indexing and no vacuuming and all that kind of stuff, but there are still bits and pieces that still need to be done that a partner can pull together with a customer's preferred stack set, if you like, of different components.
But in your experience, and perhaps your experience too, much easier
In terms of?
than other platforms in terms of just setting it up, getting it going.
Look, it's not a copy-paste thing. Like we
You
can't
would
just,
hope
No. I mean, even we have SQL. I guess Florian mentioned that. If you have a existing solution on Redshift, SQL, Teradata, etc., especially if it was happening for many years, you will see thousands and thousands of lines of SQL code, stored procedures are there, different custom queries are there that you'll find that, okay, to transfer all that here, sometimes you need to play with the syntaxes, you need to just change the architecture, order, etc. So it depends on what we want. From a scratch start, absolutely like a click. For transferring a lot of legacy code, etc., probably an accelerator would be helpful.
Yeah, okay.
And we do have our own, code conversion tools, but a lot of those partners that we mentioned, and there are others like, Contino and Trident and Vicent and others that are Snowflake partners that might have their own tools, right? So whether that be Teradata, Oracle, Netezza, or whatever that might be.